It's been a pretty trying vintage for a lot of folks in the Northwest so far. And how have you and your brother done so far this year as far as bringing in fruit and what's it looking like?
Okay, well, we basically started this week. We knew it was going to be a later vintage because of the spring this year. And then during the summer, it wasn't too bad. We were sort of catching up. We're going, well, if this keeps up, we weren't going to catch up as much as the 2009 vintage, but we were hoping for something. And then with end of August sort of petering out and the first 2 weeks of September, that really hit home. And so it's been late. And during this whole process, just knowing how late we were and not being able to count on the weather, or you shouldn't count on the weather because you just never know when that happens, we did a fair bit of thinning. And in some places you'd go through and you go, well, let's do this. This definitely has to come out. And then you do it and you wait a little bit and you go, nah. There's more, and in some blocks it went 3-4 times to go through, right? To sort of say this isn't working. We've had a winter that was cold and had some temperatures, had some winter damage because of the colder temperatures. That's balanced out a lot. A lot of varieties got secondaries, and that was probably a good thing for them because the crop's then substantially lower. There's no shoulders on the bunches. There's no, that's missing, and so your weights are down, and you're late. That's on top of it. So having less weight and crop down is good to get it that even ripe, and even then there was some thinning that took place. Varieties that withstood the winter had actually, like we had one variety that was doing really, really well, and normally would have some bud damage, but didn't. And we're going, well, this is great. Now we're going to have a good crop this year. Too much, really, though, for the weather pattern, right? So we actually dropped a fair bit. And I think we've had great tail end now of September, and beginning of October's hanging in there, and we're crossing our fingers. And a lot of stuff's coming on now real quick. And that's just a function that the tonnages were maybe even lower than we would have needed to go. But then how do you know that? Like, it's never an optimum, right? Rather have less but good than a whole lot of nothing, right?
Right. Well, it's still farming.
Yeah. And so I think in general things are good. But what also has transpired is, based on your spray program, is there's a fair bit of botrytis out there. And whether it's sour rot or noble rot, that's sort of that borderline thing depending on where you are in maturity level, but you really have to watch that. A lot of the thin-skinned varieties and really the tight bunches like Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, there's been a potential to have that happen. So if you're in a location where you are a little lower and it is a little humid and you didn't watch it, then things went nuts in the last little while. Yeah. If you've been pretty good with your program, I think, and you have a reasonable location, it hasn't been that much, but in the valley you hear some things. I know some of the major wineries that buy a lot of grapes really put out quite a few memos saying, guys, we're in trouble. We've rejected some loads. It's out there. Just don't look and dig and look and you'll find it. And so then it depends how far you still have to let them hang. Whether a spray still could have been put on like 10 days ago. And if not, then you may really be in a situation.
So what are the varieties that you brought in, and how does that correspond with traditional, if there is such a thing in farming? Well,
we've got Oxroy in, and that's sort of traditional Schomburg Gewürz. Got a bit of Pinot Gris in, got some Ehrenfelser in, right? Pinot Noir is coming in on the weekend, right? And Merlot is looking actually very good. We're really quite surprised how that sort of plunked along. Cabernet Franc's a struggler. Like, it's always the last one, and it will be this year for sure. And I'm just hoping I can get to the end of November, because we had a year about 6-7 years ago. I actually forgot the vintage. I really should know this, but where it was going to be our first red vintage, and it was a late season, and we let it hang. And somewhere around the 20th of October, nothing measurably changed in the vineyard. Sugars didn't go up, acids really didn't come down. They were ripe, and I could have harvested, but I'm saying if those aren't changing, and the sun's out and it's really quite nice and they're very healthy, I'm going, why would I pick? There's stuff happening there probably that we're not measuring, because grapevine's so complex and we're looking for all these very complex flavor components that I was hoping that's what was happening. And so we let them hang till the 10th of November because that's when the leaves were lost. It's the first frost we got, so it's time to pick. And like 2 days into the tank, you're going, I don't believe this. This is great. So that helped. If you can get the hang time with no parameters changing. Our challenge as winemakers is we want hang time because we believe things will develop, as my case in point just explains, but then your sugars keep going up and your acids keep dropping out, so your parameters are changing. So you're going, well, I'm getting out of the optimum window, and I still got 3 weeks I could let them hang, but that's suicide, right? So then you bring them in, and it's always a very tough call for a winemaker. And that was our first vintage in red, and it was the easiest. It was like standing still, let them hang. Like, why would I pick them, right? and right away the next year trying to duplicate that. Well, at what point do I pick, because my sugars are going up? So I find that a little bit awkward. So once in a while you get a good year, and where we're going with this year, everybody panicked quite a bit. Acids were through the roof. On some varieties like Rieslings, you're still pretty acidic. Like we're still hanging around 14 grams per liter. We probably have to do some TA adjustments on those. But in general, I think we're looking pretty good. Even wines at a lower TAs, still healthy pHs. So that's a very good thing this year, because sometimes you get a situation where your pH starts getting too high for the pH, but that's a characteristic of more an acidic year this year.
Right. Now you'd mentioned a term that I wasn't necessarily, or two of them. I mean, there's noble rot, but then sour rot?
Yeah, sour rot is still botrytis, so it's the same mold, but if it has an optimum condition to expand and grow, and you're not at a certain sugar level, then that becomes sour rot, and it's really poor and it's ugly and it doesn't taste good. If you're past a certain sugar level, where you're quite mature, now it becomes noble rot, where now you're evaporating the water out of the berry and you're concentrating what's left, and the flavor that's being developed on the skin of that berry is very positive. And then the other thing that's not generally talked about is that the actual mold creates about 10% glycerin. So your wine is going to have a higher glycerin content, and that just gives you weight, body, and texture.
Right. So, how much pressure, what was the influence of the early October event last year on this vintage, that you think?
Well, we've never had such a short season, or we've had, but that was an occurrence that brought it home that yes, it can be short. And I think that's what got people going this year with thinning and extra activity out in the vineyard, going, well, we can't count on getting past the 10th of October. The reality is that was an anomaly, and everybody's just saying in their mind, well, we'll try to do everything to shorten the time that we require to mature the crop, praying full well that if it did come, it's never going to be right. And I think our case in point is right now is we're not picked by any means in the valley, and we are at that time, right? Or 3 days from now, and we don't have our crop off yet at this point. So that's just a case in point. If it happened, we're sort of done, right? You deal with what you have, and everybody did the best that they could do to get there, but you sort of go, can't happen 2 years in a row.
So I guess that's why they refer to it as global climate change rather than global warming.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, there's something with the Pacific Decatur current movement that actually we're now into a 2 year of, we're not sure how long of a cycle and a cooling trend. And nobody understands that during a global warming event, right? But that current movement, I think, has a cycle of 2 years at the shortest, and I think 15 years at the longest. I'm praying it's not 15 years of cool weather. That's sort of like when we started out in the early 80s and 70s, right? That was a challenge there, and we don't really want to be there.
Right. So, okay, great. Anything about the harvest or the vintage that I didn't ask that you wanted to mention?
No. Right now, what's coming in if you're at reduced tonnages is still very ripe and flavorful. And like I said, the pHs are positive. So I'm still looking forward to some real neat things happening. It's not a disaster vintage, right? The reality is we've never had one in this valley.